Okay, everybody, I'm back. So we just left off talking about drawing a little still life object from observation. I did take a picture of it to help me kind of break it down, but I was really trying to work observationally from the subject so I could practice my gesturing. I think you can maybe see I erased some of it, but I had started this in a more kind of structural build. Using basic shapes, I separated it out into like a little pyramid, a kind of trapezoidal cone, a circle, and kind of simplified it all before I put my contour in it and kind of slowed down my marks. I did my measuring and sighting to make sure that it had the right proportions. I used my sighting where I used the stick on an angle to make sure that I had the right angle of the subject, the actual gesture of how this is sitting in space. And then I started breaking down how I can see my values. I squinted at the object and I was saying if I can use my 100 as my darkest, my 50 as my middle, and my 0 as my light, then I can have a fuller ranged drawing. And that often a good drawing has like 170, 50, 30, 10. So when you're done, it's like you can look at it and say, am I missing any of these? And how can it unfold? And then I made a map where while I'm squinting at the subject, I also was looking at my photo a little bit. And I fussed my photo in iPhoto. You could do it in Photoshop or whatever you wanted to use, your own editing software, to try to up and lower the contrast and so forth. But I made this little map where it talked about where my highlights would be, where my light source is kind of coming from, what my shadows will do, and how they dissipate out onto the surface and so forth. So our goal here is to try to practice drawing with our graphite. But I thought what we could do is we'll do it once in graphite and then we can do it once in charcoal just to see how fast that charcoal is and if you like that approach a little bit differently. So if you want, you can do this on a full sheet of paper, or I'm going to tear mine down. So I'm going to do one in graphite and one in charcoal. And when I do the charcoal one, I'll do that in a different video. I might change the pair a little bit so it's a little different. So my board is 14, so I'm going to tear this down at 7. Like I said, you could do this on a full sheet. You should have enough in your kit to do a full drawing, which could be really beautiful with a lot of negative space around it if you want. But if you want to conserve paper and tear this down, you can. Okay, so I have 2 separate sheets here. And I'm going to start by looking back at my working study and seeing how I want to translate it onto here. So I have a couple options here. I did the hard work, so if I wanted to do a trace and transfer it right on here, I could, just like I did in the last 2 units. Excuse me. Or I could just redraw it. And I think because it's a pretty simple pair and I think I want it a little smaller, I'm probably just going to redraw it. So here we go. This is like a little messy. I'm going to blow it off here. Okay, need to get new table surface. So like I did before, I made sure that it was at a good angle. I figured out where the baseline was that it sat on, that little horizon line. Oh, and you know what I might do before I do this? We're gonna really take more time with composition once we get a more complicated still life coming up soon. But I'm gonna just really quickly do a couple. We looked at this before when we did our sighting and measuring. I'm just gonna do a few compositional thumbnail studies. Oh, and you know what I need to do is this is skinnier. So these need to be a little thinner proportionately. Right, so it mimics the composition of my board that I cut down. So I'm going to see just real quick, like what happens if the pear sits right in the center of the picture plane. What if it's down low, maybe off to the side? So these little thumbnails they only need to take a couple seconds, but they can help you determine where you want the figure to sit. Maybe if it's smaller, and I could incorporate the box that it's sitting on more. That's kind of fun. Or if it's really big, I'm gonna not, I don't think I want to do really big. Mostly because it takes a while to render in graphite. I think I'm gonna go with no. I'm almost leaning towards just the simple in the center, kind of like this cube. That's kind of fun, but we'll see. I think I'm gonna just go within the middle and use that negative space. I'll go back to here. So that's really all a compositional study is just, you know, checking about where you put your subject or your figure in your ground. Okay, so this is a 4B. I'm going to switch to an H or a 2 maybe. What do I have here? I just have a B. Let's just use a B. I just want it to be a little light while I get started. Sharpen my pencil. Okay. Very light. I'm going to start to kind of figure out what I want. And what I learned in my first one is that the bottom of the pear is kind of off to the right here. I learned about the width, or the height and the width, that it was like a little more than half. So I'm lightly mapping. I'm going to draw a little bit of a diagonal. I'm drawing so lightly, I don't even know if you can see it, but I don't want those marks there when I get really rendering. Okay, I think that seems pretty good for the size. So here I'm going to just lightly gesture in again. I'm looking at my map, I'm looking at my subject, I'm looking a little at my photo. The answers are always going to be in the real thing. If you get lost, I'm going to start with that kind of triangle pyramid cone at the top. I know I'm not sure if you can see this. I'll make it darker in just a second, but it's really still that map space. This, where the pear dips in, should be higher than that side, so I'm making sure. Yep. And then it kind of bulges out there. I'm still kind of drawing with straighter edges. And then I'll put those curves in a minute. They're There's a little bit of complexity there. Dips in, back out. Okay, so there's my map. Seems pretty good. Maybe it was a little bigger than I wanted it to be, but I think it's okay. So now I'm going to come in and try to really find the contour, but I'm not going to do it real dark because this is where I want to put the rendering in. So again, I'm using my B, which is one of the lighter pencils. And I'm going to kind of reshape, build my contour thoughtfully. I'm not letting those original lines really push me around too much. I'm trying to really re-observe and change things if I need to.
Henry, what are you eating? Are you eating smart things?
And there's some bumps in here. There's a bigger bump here. So it's like I'm really looking at the contour. I'm really looking at the pear now. Kind of glancing at my photo every once in a while to see that I have it about right. Feels pretty good. This is where there's some little bit of overlapping. Got the bit of the stem. And I had measured before that this was about the distance for the stem. And I can see that the stem lines up over here, so about there. I'm gonna make that tip of it a little bigger than what I think it is, so it shows up in the drawing. It's always good to kind of exaggerate things sometimes. Gets wider. Yeah. Okay, and then I want to put my line in. I am going to use my ruler again if I can find it, so that I know that they meet up at the back end. Again, I'm going to double check where that line intersects on the pear, so I don't put the line too low and I don't put the line too high. We're in there. Check it on the real pear. And I am going to just take it out real light, and I'm going to capitalize on the white of the picture plane. So I don't want it to go edge to edge. Might make it a little longer though. Be longer on this side. Longer on this side. I hope you guys can see this okay. Okay, so there's the pear. Now I'm going to come in and try and see where the shadows are. Then I'll start to lay in a map, but maybe not quite so heavy and not with the numbers. And then we'll start to really render it. So let's see where this shadow comes in. I'm looking at the real pear again. I'm using these little bit harder edges. It's really, I feel like these sharper, building with these simple shapes and these breakdowns help. If we go straight into our curves, they're often not quite in the right spot, and they can look a little oh, what is that called, cartoony, I guess. And I know I'm going to cover up over all this. I'm being a little very light, but kind of see where it goes. So this is that second layer of shadow. You can also see that it's lighter here, darker there. So when I start rendering, I'll make stock of that. You can see that the shadow kind of gets closer and farther depending on how the light source is affecting where it's sitting, where the shadow casts. So it gets a little narrower over here, probably because of the way that it leans forward. Okay, so in these studies, we had talked a lot about it's easier to build the negative space first so that the form can pop up from it. We practice it different here where the background was white. But I'm gonna try and keep this background clean and just start with the positive shape. But it's always good to start with your darks first. And with graphite, we want to resist all smudging and smearing. We want to just be additive, use hatching, cross hatching, scribbling if you want, but like a buildup, not a smudgy schmutzy amount. So I'm going to set the value scale and the tone with one of my darkests, which was this core cast shadow kind of under the pear, where I had made a note that I'd make it like a 90. So and I want to kind of exaggerate the bumps and the divots. I'm excited to see what objects you guys pick. Curious what it'll be. So this is where we really have to act like our graphite is like floating over the surface of the paper and that you're building it in these nice layers. I still have my B. I'm going to switch in a minute, but this is kind of getting me started. Okay, so here I'm going to pull this out to fill my shadow space. Just to kind of get it laid in as a base layer. You want to really think of these as like building a, this would be like the underpainting. So I want to make sure that I get rid of any of my line work. I have my plastic eraser, clean it up a little. So I'm not touching any of the material that I drew for the value. I'm just trying to kind of get rid of this very light B pencil edge so I don't have to wrangle with it later, so that I can have it kind of fuzz out where I want it to. Okay, I think I'm gonna wait. No, I'll put a little bit here. So here I'm gonna do just a little bit of a dissipation with the B pencil, but I'll come back to this. So it's like layering and building. Okay, now I'm gonna move into here. I'm gonna switch to a, let's start with a 2B. Actually, I want a 3B. Here's a 4. I like that 3 because it's kind of in the middle space. I gotta find one. Maybe I'll use a 4. So I can't find the 3. Yeah. Oh wait, here's one. Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna sharpen it. Okay, so looking at my map for my notes of value, I'm going to try and start with some of the darker areas first. So this like 40, 30, 40, and then I can kind of maybe even come up out of the shadow, turning it so that I can control my marks. So I draw a little and then I'm gonna stop and see how it's going. Very light, slow kind of layering of the material. I can see this little dark here, that little dark there. I kind of made that note there. I'm gonna just do a little outline to kind of help me see where I want to take that dark. In your reading, it talks about a high key drawing and a low key drawing. So you can have a drawing that sits very bright, high key, or low key where the whole drawing's really dark and dramatic. I want this to be a fairly high key. I'd rather it not be super, super dark. And you can tell because proportionately, most of my numbers are lower than 30. So I want it to have a kind of a softer quality. I'm going to come back to my shadow with my 3B. And I want to get rid of any kind of outlining by layering this material. And I'm really thinking about like how the marks are, how am I trying to say this? How they relate as they move forward. So I don't want it to be like scribble, 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 scribble. Like I want it to have a real smooth transition from one to the next. Not to say you can't make a super cool drawing this way, you can, because we've talked a lot about all the different kinds of mark making that we can use, but I want this one to try to be subtle. And you can see how that once was a dark line right there, but now it's becoming a shadow. So if we can get rid of those lines, it works. However, in a minute, I'm gonna have you put some line. We wanna have some open and closed lines that come back in. Speaking of, I'm kind of going over the pear into the negative space here with a little bit of cross hatching so that I almost lose it in that little spot right there. It's all about the edges, how the edge of the positive and the negative interact. Notice too, I'm still drawing just like when we did these. Like here, I was drawing the negative space first, the most boring stuff, but it sets the tone and the temperament and everything for the drawing. So here, I decided to keep the background white, but I'm still doing the boring stuff. Like I'm not actually drawing the pear, I'm drawing the shadow, and that's gonna help this pear find its value space and kind of the home where it wants to be. I'm gonna erase this outer note, kind of. I'm gonna leave it a little bit so I can see it, but barely. So I can see kind of how it dissipates out. I'm gonna draw a little bit of this table box. Okay, so having this kind of dissipate out for the back of the box where it gets kind of thick and thin, and there's like a little pressure point there on the edge. I'm gonna use that. So I'm trying to get a little lighter as I come away from the pear. Notice I'm using all horizontal lines. I'm trying to have control over that material. So there's like a pretty thoughtful hatching mark. I'm gonna do something to this box in a minute, but I don't know what. And then like I did here, I'm gonna look and see, so it's darker on the pear, how I wanna tangle with this table edge. It's pretty dark over here. I had it at a 40. So a slow build, but trying to make it so it becomes a shift of value over a plane instead of a a line, a value, and then a new value. Like if I put a big hard edge outline here, it would really flatten. I know it's really pale right there, but it's just the box where it's at. I'm gonna make it a little darker so that it mimics kind of what's happening here. Okay, so I'm starting to get my darks here, my darks here. I did mostly vertical. I'm gonna switch and do a little cross hatching in the other direction. In a minute, I might shift to a 6. My graphite. Got a little darker up around the corner, darker through here. Looks like there's a little raise up of dark, so I'm going to kind of lightly give myself a border for where I want that dark to go. Using that vertical kind of hatching mark again. These drawings can be really cool too if you really show that hatching mark as well. You don't have to hide it or blend it all. If you want, you can slow it all down in the end, but not really necessary. So this is still going to be a lot darker, but I'm going to build up to it. So here's where I want to look at my map very carefully and all my subjects. I want this to be my highlight area, kind of laying it in. This will be a transition zone. There's like a little bit of light that shifts through here. I don't know if you remember this from like old school Photoshop, but they would have that posterize button. That's kind of what you're doing, like breaking it down into these bigger shifts. Here's that other highlight, and using these contours to kind of help you see where and how you'll build the lights and darks. So I want this darker so that I can make this about this value, but I'm going to fill this in first. Again, this is just like our beginning layer. Looking through here. I'm going back over it so I can kind of hide my brush strokes or my drawing strokes. So you can start to see it coming together. Darker over here. I'm being careful not to put like a dent or a impression into the paper. So again, it's like you're floating that material kind of over the top and make it real light through here. Oops. Oh well, I made a little too dark of a mark there. I did not have you guys make a value scale. They are helpful, so if you felt compelled to do one, you could, but this is basically making a value scale as you shift. So it goes from the darker and then moves around the form into a lighter value. That's still the white of the paper. This, I'm going to darken there, keep that light, so you can start to feel, because of this contour that we did, that the form has some ins and outs, unlike when we did the ball and we just kind of made it up. we're trying to really look and see that sensitivity to the figure that you have in front of you, whether it be a pear or a car or a face. It's a little darker here. I'm still using this vertical mark. I can cross hatch it more a little later, but I'm following my loose kind of mapping contour lines there. Now I'm going to cross hatch a little because I want to go with this contour. Being careful again just to float the material on the top. But I'm using that contour, that cross hatching, to kind of make it feel like it has a ring around it almost, to imply that volume. I don't like how those marks are taking to the paper. To hide some of that in a little bit. Work my way up. Gets a little darker here. I don't think I like where this is. I'm gonna move it up. Kind of looking at the pear again. Gets real light right here. I'm gonna erase. And that, we've talked about these, but these open and closed edges, like I think I'm gonna have it be open there. So the negative space kind of works into the form. I might open it up over here too, somewhere. And then I can close it and make it darker. Other spots. So I almost intentionally like put a little bit of line work right there to make it feel like a core cast shadow. So kind of cross hatching. I'm going to definitely get out a darker graphite in a minute and really lay in that dark shadow. But let's work up to the top here. I didn't give myself enough of a map, I don't think. So I kind of want to, it's like it gets dark here, it's a little darker here. Start with those darks. A little darker here. Lighter. Gets light here, so this is where I'm just going to kind of fade it out. So I have that little bit of highlight. So I kind of pulled my marks apart a little, so there was a little more shift there. I don't know if I love this shape. I feel like it needs to be a little wider. Kind of darkening. I'm gonna just take a little pigment out of there. Now I'm going to try and do my stem. So the stem is sticky. I'm going to come back to all of this, but I want to make sure that I make it a little more exaggerated than you would think. So I'm going to make it a little wider. there's this little bump that comes through here. And now, I know this sounds crazy because it's so tiny, but treat it like it's a basic shape. So I'm gonna act like this is like a little tiny cube right here, and this is a tiny cube right here, and that's gonna help me know where I can put my lights and darks. If it helps you to think of it more as like a little cylinder, that could work. And then it has like some little detail. So I'm using a kind of heavier linear mark. To kind of get that swirly quality. Okay, so layer one. Now I'm gonna take some of my dark graphite and really lay in a little bit heavier. I might use my 6B. I don't think I'm gonna use my 9B, but I'll start with my 6. This is out of my kit, my woodless graphite. I'm just gonna sharpen it a little. And I wanna really get dark in here, down below. Again, I'm trying not to squish the paper. I'm trying to float the material over the surface of the tooth of the paper. I don't love this like rounded shadow, so I just, for a mark making shift, I'll have this be really soft and curvy, and then I'm going to really highlight some of these straight edges coming out of it, just to kind of emulate the wood a little bit and just give a little contrast. I'm going to really hold this on its side and be very light with it. I just don't love this. So I kind of had it look like it feathered out a little bit. Okay, so I'm feeling close, but I definitely feel like I have darker darks over here. So I'm gonna put a little cross hatching in this area. I have to be really gentle with my 6. I'm kind of going like over, I'm not drawing right now, I'm just showing you like an exaggerated, going through into the shadow and into the pear. I'm going to cross hatch it a different direction to try to fill the tooth of the paper, have it kind of feather out. Kind of hold it up and see. I don't love the way that mark making is turning out when I shifted materials, so I'm going to go back to a 2B and try to put a little of that vertical horizontal hatching back into it. I want to see a little bit of that mark making. Yeah, I think it's close. I like that little opened up edge right there. So I'm going to see if I can find a place to put it here. I feel like right there might work. Actually, I feel like I need to do it down here where there's like a dark loss. Again, trying really hard not to squish or scar the paper. Yeah, so it kind of got a little lost in there. I think I'm going to leave it like that for now. I think I'll walk away and see if I want to add some things. But notice I didn't really use the eraser at all. I might right here pull out a tiny bit of a highlight, but I really want it to just kind of breathe on its own with this additive stuff. This might be where someone would come in and really use this blending stump, or sometimes called Titillion, where they would like smudge it all and make it so it was real smooth and shiny. And that's an option, and you can try it, but the goal in drawing one is to say, can I make a drawing work without all this blending? Because if I can control it in an additive way, then it'll be cool when I come in and try to use this. But sometimes when I see real smudgy surfaces, they don't look quite as sophisticated. Seeing that kind of mark making makes it look like you have more control. Yeah, I'm gonna turn the video off, but I think I may come and work in on it a little bit more, but I think we're pretty close. Okay, in the next video, I'm gonna try and draw out the pear and charcoal real fast and show you how fast it can be. It's a different result, but very quick. Okay, see you in a bit.